and went to Baylor University. All right! And it's always good to be back. The one thing Texas has that's hard for the rest of the country to compete with is barbecue. So I'm down here and I'm in line for barbecue, and the guy in front of me's got 2 big plates of barbecue. And I'm like, you're not going to live very long eating like that. And he looked at me and he said, well, my granddad lived to be 105. I said, well, your granddad didn't live to be 105 eating like that. He said, no, my granddad lived to be 105, minding his own business. There's a moral to that story. Maybe we could have a government that was minding his own business. Well, there are things the government has to do, and there are things the government should do. But frankly, when you're looking at your cell phone, listening to, downloading from the internet, it's none of the government's damn business what you're doing right now. We want the revolution over this. John Adams said that the spark that inspired the revolution, the spark that got the world going, was James Otis, who argued eloquently against general warrants. What's a general warrant? It's a warrant that doesn't have anyone's name on it. It's a warrant that applies to everyone indiscriminately. How is this going on? The British soldiers were writing their own general warrants, going into the houses of the colonists and saying, show us your papers. They wanted to know if they paid the stamp back. They couldn't figure it out unless they got in their house. They didn't want to take the time to get a warrant or call a judge. They wanted to look in everyone's houses. And we as conservatives are so good on the Second Amendment. There's probably nobody here that didn't want to defend the Second Amendment, right? But you can't have the Second Amendment unless you protect the Fourth Amendment.
Right on.
Unless you are secure in your house, unless you are secure in your papers, you can't have your freedom. And the government says, oh, it's only boring old business records. Who cares? Think about your visa bill, though. They say it's not protected by the Fourth Amendment. They say they can look at everyone's visa records, everyone's data, everyone's phone calls. And you know what I say? If I look at your visa record, I can tell, do you drink? Do you smoke? Do you gamble? What books do you read? What magazines do you read? What medicines do you take? What doctors do you go to? This is all very private information. And I have no problem if the government thinks you're a terrorist and they call a judge and they get probable cause, they can look at all of that. But I don't want them looking at the records of 300 million innocent Americans. Now, when I was first elected, one of the other senators came up to me and he said, well, the first 6 months you're here, you'll pinch yourself and say, how did I get here? Amongst all these really important personages, these famous people. And then he said, the next 6 months you'll pinch yourself and say, how the hell did the rest of these guys get here? I'm in the next 6 months now. And that's why I have always been and always will be, and think one of the biggest reforms we could have in this country is term limits. Yeah. Genuinely good people trying to do the right thing. But everybody, no matter how well intended, gets beaten down by the system. And after a while, maybe it's time to get some turnover. I've met them. I've met every one of them. There is no monopoly of knowledge in Washington. There are people here in this room, there are people in Texas, there are other people that could replace every one of them. And maybe we finally get a change. Maybe we finally get something good to happen in this country instead of having the same old status quo. We are so stuck, the inertia, the wheels of government have ground to a stop because we can't do anything. We are so dysfunctional that we can't pass legislation even when we agree on it. that even when we shut the government down, it costs more money to keep it closed. Now, you may be saying, there's no way that's true. There's no way that's true. So here, I'll tell you why it is true. When we had to shut down government, they sent us a notice, and they said, list who your essential employees are and your unessential employees. And I thought, well, this is going to be a learning lesson. This could really be how we have a map to downsizing government. This is how we could do a great job. So we got our list, and I said to myself, call up the IRS. Let's see what their list looks like. Call up the EPA. See what their list looks like. So we got a list from the IRS. 90% unessential. There's a real lesson we can learn from this. There's 100,000 federal employees that make over $100,000 a year. So we got a list of the IRS, 90% unessential. Then we got a list of the EPA, 95% unessential. But these federal employees are crafty. If you want to know the one thing that is probably immortal, the one thing that you cannot end, that will never die, it's a federal job. So these people had outfoxed us. 95% unessential. You know why? Because if you're unessential, you don't have to show up for work during a shutdown, but you'll still be paid. It is sad. But as we were looking through this, we did discover a few things. They were looking at some of the people in the EPA that hadn't shown up. One woman hadn't been there in 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm not making this up. For the last 5 years, she had no communication, no email, no work product, nothing. She still works there. There was another woman who had 17 of her family members working for her, paid internships, paid programs. She was selling vitamins and cosmetics from her computer at work. She still works there. There was another guy who was downloading porn 6 hours a day. I'm not making this up. He still works there. You remember the VA scandal? You had people lying about the waiting list with veterans dying, and those people still work for the VA. The definition of a dysfunctional government is that you can't fire even people who lie, cheat, and steal and don't show up for work. It's crazy. But my favorite one from the EPA is they discovered a guy named Jonathan Beal. Jonathan Beal had always gotten performance reviews that were great performance reviews. He's gotten a raise. He's said to be the right-hand man to Gene McCarthy. His specialty was global warming. And so they got to check him, though, and he was rarely at work. He hadn't been seen in 6 months from work. But he always kept getting performance reviews and bonuses. Everybody said he was a great employee. So they did something extraordinary. They went to his boss and said, what about him not showing up for work? He said, oh, he works for the CIA also. Really? The CIA and the EPA, an interesting combination. So they did something truly extraordinary. They called the CIA. And the CIA said, Jonathan who? And so I can just imagine, they finally caught this guy, but here's what I'm imagining. Here's Jonathan Beal. He's at his house. He has a swimming pool because he makes 150 grand a year. He's sitting in a Chase Lounge with a beer, and his boss calls and says, are you coming in today, Jonathan? He's like, no, I'm in Istanbul on secret assignment. During the shutdown, the president was afraid you might not notice the shutdown. So they did all kinds of crazy stuff to make sure. Remember there was the roadside park on the, where you pull over for a scenic overlook to see Mount Rushmore, 20 miles away from the park. There's nobody attending there. Oh, that's no fault. They shut it down to make sure you didn't go to the clubs. You can't even look at Mount Rushmore. The other thing they did was they went and they wrapped the World War II monument. The World War II monument, if you've been there, you've never been to the World War II monument? It has no entrance, it has no exit, it has no attendant, it has no cost. In fact, I think it was built with private funds. Okay, so we got a little bit of grass every couple of weeks. But they shut it down. They wrapped it with barricade after barricade. If you want to remember one symbol, one image of the shutdown, the liberals will tell you what to remember, but if you want to remember one image, remember this. The World War II veterans getting off their bus, with
all right.
Do you think General Patton had a strategy before he went to battle? Do you think Douglas MacArthur had a strategy before he went to battle? How about General Eisenhower? Do you think he had a strategy before he went to battle? You know what I think? If the president has no strategy, maybe it's time for a new president.